All right, how's that look, everyone? Is that good?
Looks great.
Okay, good deal.
Looks good to me.
All right, let's kick it off here then. So you guys know my background. It tends to be more towards forestry, and I have a lot of coursework that I've worked and developed, I guess, for helping the folks that teach tree identification up at University of Florida. So I guess I just wanted to give you guys some of the highlights of what's around here in terms of botanical ID and things that you need to think about in the landscape here. And there's a lot of trees, so this is only a cross section. It's just a snippet of what's out there. So with all that, I mean, I just wanted to point out that this all goes back to flora-friendly landscape principles. Right plant, right place is the big one. I guess the other biggest one I think people need to think about is reducing stormwater runoff, and that goes back to gray versus green infrastructure, and that trees help water percolate, et cetera, into the ground, as opposed to just letting them go into into open water bodies. But the big thing is for right plant, right place. And I want you guys to think of trees based on the ID features. Some of you are much more versed in this than others, but it's a skill that we all have to keep refining over time. And if you don't use it, you can lose it pretty quick, like a lot of things, like languages, etc. So, and then outside of that, I want people to think of trees based on their usage in the Central Florida landscape, and how what their biology, another way to put that is their natural history, whether they're native or non-native. That could be helpful to give context to what's going on in the environment and the trees, and what types of environmental conditions that trees can deal with. So let's see here. And so why do we need to identify trees? I guess the big thing, the simple answer is right plant, right place. You need to know them to what you're dealing with to make our lives much more simple and and other people that might come to the clinic and et cetera, for diagnosing a lot of the problems that homeowners will bring in. And so how do we go about identifying the trees? The simple answer is through the morphological characteristics. In reality, we can utilize all of our senses as tools to help with the identification of trees and other plants that are outside. But knowing their morphology will give us a big clue to what's going on here. And one of the big things that people need to think about, I guess, when identifying plants is their phyllotaxy. Basically, how is the leaf situated in relation to other leaves on a stem or a branch? And the biggest thing you can look at is this opposite versus alternate. There's also a third category called whorled, where multiple leaves will come out from the same area, but it's a lot less common with regards to trees and shrubs. So, and then the other outside of that, thinking of trees based on their arrangement, whether a leaf is simple or compound. If you look at this right here, this example on the left here, whoop, example on the left is a simple leaf. So everything is included like on one petiole right here. Whereas the petiole for a compound leaf, you actually have leaflets on them. So that could be really helpful. And the thing to pay attention to with all this is that this is not a branch, but there will be a bud or a bud scar nearby that will help you identify where exactly like the leaf is coming out of, because it can get a little tricky for certain plants. So from here, you want to always keep in mind that there's a lot of language here, like that in terms of botanically keeping up with the various plants. You guys have all probably seen Mark Frank, and I'm sure he'll come back as a returning speaker at some point. But this is not this is a whole lesson unto itself right here. But just keep in mind, I'll be using a lot of this terminology, and today's class is more of reinforcement and than actually getting into this on it like as a topic on its own. And then from there, you can go ahead and use that terminology to help you, like via books that have keys inside of them. So Dr. Kozer, who was here a couple of weeks ago, these are a couple of his books that he came out with that give very good photos and representations of the various plants or various trees that we might encounter here. Trees and tree-like plants, so palms are included as well. So I just want to point out this as well. This is a very important concept to think of trees arboriculturally, is how the form of the tree is, whether it has a central stem, as in these X-current trees, or if you have a stem with multiple large branches that we call scaffolds. This can play a big part in how resistant the trees are to a lot of environmental conditions, and in particular, we think of storms. This tree right here, if you folks watched the presentation I gave and the first Lunch and Learn, I think we started on Zoom. This is a much more firm structure, this pyramidal X-current form, because you basically have one really well-rooted stem, and then you have a bunch of smaller branches that are well situated, and these unions are a lot better. There's usually a better ratio there of branch to stem, whereas these bigger branches that are in the decurrent trees have a much higher tendency to break off. So I guess another thing I just wanted to point out is that we're in Florida, and one of the big things that we have in our favor here is that we have leaves constantly throughout the year. And when I learned a lot of this stuff up in Tennessee, and for a lot of people that are in forestry in other parts of the world, we have it really easy here because you're just stuck with trying to use bark, tree form, and then the buds on the branches. And for a lot of times you can't get to these because they're high up in the tree. So here we're a little spoiled. And so life should be a little easier if this is something that you really start to get into. So just to, and I kind of want to just point out before we get into trees is where we're at in terms of USDA hardiness and in terms of biogeography. If you look at Florida, we're in the same latitude as southern Morocco or Egypt. And if you think about it, these are the same regions where there's a lot of desert throughout, and not just desert, but hot deserts throughout the world on these 30-degree latitudes. But if you look at Florida, we're peninsula, we constantly have, we have good circulation of air around us with water. And we're very similar actually to Southeast Asia. So a lot of the plants that do really well out here also do really well in Florida and the Southeast in general. And so here's our USDA hardiness zone map. And this was created in 2012. And you'll see that we're pretty high up on the upper end of 9B. But this map hasn't been updated since 2012. I think I've heard that like they get updated every 10 years. There's a good chance that it's going to be moving up next time that they update it. We haven't really had a really solid freeze since 2010 probably. And this is probably about what it'll look like the next time they update it here. We'll be towards the middle of it, if not lower. So the conditions here will be closer to what you might have towards, like, I don't know, towards the coast, maybe what Titusville or some of these lower parts of it, or like Sebring maybe. So let's just jump in here. I'm going to start out with some small trees. Here's a variety of them that I try to include for people if they're interested in trees here, and I think are generally in FFL plant material guides. And I'll have this set up for medium and large trees as well. But I only got time to go over a few for each of these. So crepe myrtle. I guess it's pretty much the only thing I know that it's in its family, Lithraceae. As you guys know, it's decurrent and multi-stemmed. It's pretty hardy for most of the state. And the flower they tend to be pretty prolific in a defining feature, small and crinkled. And the fruit is a brown woody capsule that, like, when the flower isn't present, those are on there a lot of the time as well. So just going back, I also want to point out the leaf here. This is one of the things that also gives it away is that it's opposite to subopposite, and not a lot of trees will be opposite. So that's a very defining characteristic for trying to be able to identify what a plant is. Also, which is kind of unique for around here, is it's deciduous, and they typically become very well colored in the fall, yellow, orange, red. They also have showy bark, and so something they did up at the University of Florida is they painted a bunch of them orange or blue here, and from there, what they did was when the bark eventually peels on it. And so when they came out, I don't know how well you can see that, like they became kind of orange and blue, like the University of Florida colors. So I just want to point out a few of the cultivars here and what their different colors are. These are some of the most common cultivars currently used: Muskogee, Natchez, and Tuscarora. And I think it's worth pointing out too that a lot of the purple cultivars tend to grow slower. This tree is a mixture of, it's hybridized between multiple Lagerstroemias, and they have different growing characteristics. So that's going to influence how the plants mature as well. And the white, from what I've also heard and seen, the whites flowered plants tend to be very vigorous and tend to grow the most, or the tallest a lot of the time as well. But you have variability in all these colors as well. This is just kind of a generalization. Okay, so our next small tree is the Japanese blueberry. We've got a few of these around on the campus here at the Orange County Extension Center. It's a very decurrent plant typically, but like as you can see on this plant on the left, but if you prune it the right way and you're on top of it, you can turn it into a tree. The one that is, we've got one that's on a parking lot peninsula here in the front, and it looks like a lot like this tree in the middle. But they also make a very good hedge in some instances. Like some people will go ahead and grow them like this. So the leaf is simple and alternate. One of the things that sticks out though is that it is crenate, is what we would call this margin, kind of tooth-like. And a lot of the newer growth has red leaves on it. So like that is another thing that really, it kind of makes it pop out in the environment as well. If you're lucky enough to see the flowers, I don't think they're up for very long a lot of the time. They have these little white urn-like flowers, which eventually turn into these small, dark blue olive-like drupe, which is where the plant gets its name, the Japanese blueberry. Definitely not edible though. And it is native to Southeast Asia. It's one of these ones that I was like talking about biogeography there that did really well in an environment that was similar to Florida, and it does pretty good here. We had Deb here visiting, and I think she mentioned that like some cities aren't using it as much as they used to. Some of them aren't using it at all, but still overall, I think it's a pretty common one and does pretty well. So weeping bottle brush, this is in the Myrtaceae family. So I think that these are like the myrtle family basically, which wax myrtle, if you're familiar with that, that's another native around here. It's related to them. It has a very decurrent form and it can be multi-stemmed as well, but typically turns into 20 by 20 given time. Its leaf is simple and alternate, so that's really not going to help out too much identifying it. But the flowers are very conspicuous. They're very small, and they emerge in clusters 3 to 5 inches long. And the fruit, it turns into these like little half-inch round woody capsules. Its native range is Eastern Australia. It has a little bit of wind resistance. A lot of wildlife like them, various pollinators, including hummingbirds. And it's a very good urban tree, and that's why I'm including it here. There's a little bit of controversy about this plant, but sometimes we just need plants that can put up with really terrible conditions, and this is one of them. So the controversy kind of comes from the fact that this tree is now within the genus of Melaleuca. It was always a relative of Melaleucas, but this is a really invasive tree from South Florida that's taken over large parts of wetlands here, in particular in the Everglades. And as you can see, like these trees grow in very high densities, and they are the legitimate definition of what invasive looks like in terms of there's nothing else, there's no room for anything else to make it in there. So there have been cases apparently of this plant being a little invasive under certain circumstances, and that means that it has established itself and readily like in an outside natural environment. But I mean, honestly, like if you're growing it in a yard or anything like that, and it's consistently manicured and taken care of, it's not that likely, particularly here in Central Florida, to be all that problematic. So, okay, we're moving on to the tababuyas, well, not tababuyas, the medium-sized trees here. And the first tree I've got listed is silk floss tree, which is an interesting one because it's in the family Malvaceae. And there are some pretty famous tropical trees from this plant's family. So like the Kapok tree, very large, buttressed tree, buttressed roots from South America. But then baobabs are also in it, and they're from Africa and Madagascar. So the form for these trees is they're pretty decurrent for the most part. They'll get up to 50 feet tall and about 50 feet wide. And they've got a palmately compound leaf, 5 to 7 leaflets. And then the other thing that really sticks out is in late fall to early winter, you get a lot of these flowers on them. So the tree, yeah, the fruit, those flowers will eventually form an 8-inch long pear-shaped capsule that turns green to brown when ripe. The native range is Brazil to Argentina, and we're on the edge of hardiness for this plant. So it will go ahead, it will be hardy. If you guys could mute your microphones, it would help, because it can be just a little distracting, here. And I know we're all eating and all that. You guys can go ahead and turn it back on once we get to the end of the presentation. So the hardiness is from 9B to 11. We're right on the edge here in Central Florida, and the wind resistance is very low. So if you look at where the tree's from originally in South America, it's a region that is not very prone towards cyclone activity. So that's a lot of the time, that's the indicator of whether a tree will do really well with wind, with high windy conditions or not, is based on that factor. I guess an interesting side use of the tree is that the fibers that are inside of the pods can be used for they're used for pillows, mattresses, that type of thing in tropical areas. Another cool thing is that the bark on this thing, they have lots of cone-shaped thorns all over them, and it varies from tree to tree as to how prevalent these thorns are. But they think that this originally evolved as a mechanism to keep away ground sloths. Monkeys and other animals that live in trees don't seem to have much of a problem climbing over the tree. You know, these don't hinder them very much. So they think that this is something that's like a leftover characteristic for defending themselves against prehistoric animals. And another thing that you'll notice here is that there's green, it's green all over the bark, there's chlorophyll all through it. So it's highly drought resistant because it can drop its leaves in times of drought, and then and the water pressure is not as high throughout the plant through the canopy, but it's still able to keep photosynthesizing when those dry conditions occur. So next tree is winged elm, which is a pretty interesting one. I think it has really nice bark. It has a very decurrent traditional tree shape, and it doesn't get too big. I think that typically they'll max out at 40 or 50. And so it's another one that's, that doesn't have as huge a hazard putting closer to a house. And the leaf is 2 to 4 inches long. You notice they're simple and alternate. And in the fall, it turns yellow. So the flowers, they're not very noteworthy. They're very small, but eventually they turn into these little samaras. So since this tree is deciduous, you'll see these sometimes in the late winter or early spring. These little, we call samaras, which are wind spread. The native range is southern 2/3 of the eastern United States. Hardiness is 6 to 9, and the wind, it has very high, medium high wind resistance. Most of the elms hold up pretty well. Well, besides Siberian elm, hold up pretty well under most conditions. So, and this is why the plant is called winged elm, is because of these corky projections that it forms on the ends of its branches, that basically it looks like a wing. Okay, another flowering tree, Hong Kong orchid tree. So this is one of my personal favorites. And I guess it's worth noting here that we are kind of on the edge with this one as well. But it is listed for 9B in terms of its hardiness. And I think that it's safe up to I4 probably in terms of its planting. So something that stands out about this tree is it's not really an orchid tree in the sense of it being an orchid. It's a false cognate in that this tree is actually much closer related to beans or peas in the Fabaceae family. The form is decurrent. If anything, it's super weedy. The branches can compete with each other quite a bit. And that kind of has some consequences with how it deals with wind as well. But I guess the thing about the leaf is it has these nice leaves as well. They're 4 to 6 inches wide, and they kind of look like a cow's hoof. And in Spanish, that's one of the common names for this plant is pata de vaca, which means foot of the cow. And I guess, you know, the flower is very conspicuous. I think that typically it flowers from about November until March or so. And it's native to Southeast Asia. And the hardiness is 9B through 11. So it's more of a South Florida tree, but like I mentioned, it can make it here as well. And pretty low wind resistance, which, you know, goes back to the weediness of this plant and not really forming very good junctures between branches and stems. So interesting thing here, it's if you ever see the flag of Hong Kong, it is the flower that's on the flower of Hong Kong. So another interesting thing about this plant is that it's a hybrid, and I think it's Bauhinia variegata, and I can't remember that the other one is here, but basically it is the product of this hybridization, and it's sterile. So it's you kind of have that mule effect where the chromosomes are an odd number, and this plant cannot create any new plants from its seeds, if it even can produce seeds. So that's a very good thing for orchid tree, because these others, if you introduce them to Florida, either the parents, they're considered to be invasive, but for us, if we just plant these, which have to be propagated from other vegetable, from other vegetable matter, not from seeds, via cloning, they're not going to cause a problem when they escape into the environment. Like there is no escaping into the environment based on seeds. So some of the pros of this plant, I'll give you the pros and cons for this one. Prolific flowers. It's very vigorous and hard to kill. Even if it does lose big sections of the plant, like I mentioned, it's weedy. It comes back in vengeance sometimes. And it's sterile. So the cons, it is susceptible to extreme cold. You might get some burn here potentially. Poor hurricane storm resistance. There's a lot of debris associated with the flowers. When it sheds those flowers, they really can come down. And so it's not really ideal for putting right next to sidewalks. So now we're moving to the large trees of Florida. Like as we mentioned a couple weeks ago with Dr. Kozer, these are the trees that tend to be the ones that will suck up the most of the pollutants in the air and also have the most influence in terms of providing shade. So obviously the most common large live tree in Central Florida is the southern live oak. It's in the oak family, oak and beech family. And I would say that it's not just decurrent. This thing is super decurrent. It is really just how it grows. If it's grown in open areas, it will produce many scaffolds. But the thing is it's a really strong tree, and it can support those to a pretty good extent, into maturity. The leaf is simple and alternate. It's got revolute margins. So that just means it's a little boat-like around the edges of it. And new growth can be a little toothed. Typically on younger trees, you'll see that. The flower is a catkin, so it's really not that helpful and is only there for a little bit of the year. The fruit is 3/4 inch oblong acorn. It's bowl-shaped. And It's native to a lot of the southeastern United States and a good chunk of Texas, and even into Mexico a little bit. So, and it's hardy throughout pretty much all of Florida. And it has the highest level of wind resistance, which is something to keep in mind here. But it is still decurrent, and if it's still, if there are features within it, see, most trees would have failed much earlier in the life of this plant from this type of feature where like there are multiple stems coming from the same place, codominance. But because this is such a sturdy plant and has such high wood density, this tree can often overcome these big issues that they might have morphologically. And so that's kind of an interesting thing about them, is that that might not be an issue for most of their lives, but if there are risk features within them, they probably still will fail at some point. I mean, and the consequences can be pretty big if there is something underneath them. So that's something to keep in mind, that they're not likely to fail, but if there is a risk feature, it will fail at some point. You just don't necessarily know what the timeline is on them. So people have tried to deal with this basically by breeding new cultivars of the tree to have a different shape, where you don't have lots of these scaffolding branches, that you have a central leader. And one of the main trees that they've come up with is Cathedral. It's probably overly planted at this point. These cultivars came out in the 90s, and it provides I guess if you look here, we've got high rise as well. So the Cathedral is kind of in between the high rise and the standard form. Like it is still definitely more, it will not take up quite as much room as a typical live oak, but it will not look quite like a high rise. So, and the less than 1% of high-rise trees required staking in the nursery to create the central trunk, whereas up to 30% of seedlings of, like a standard wild type live oak will require stakes and splint, and all of that to keep them, keep the form secure. So there is one more cultivar called Millennium to keep in mind, but it tends to not be as common as these. Like I mentioned, the Cathedral is like overplanted. So sometimes you'll have problems with, a lot of times what will come up if people is, they're very susceptible to gall wasps. So that's something also to keep in mind, that what happens when you overplant the same tree or plant over and over again, that you'll have these recurring conditions as well. So next tree is the doppelganger, the evil twin of the live oak, and is the laurel oak. On the surface, they look pretty similar, but once you get close to them, there are some pretty important features that are different. It's still an oak, but in terms of oaks, it's not all that closely related to a live oak. They can't hybridize, for example. But if you look at it, it still has a very decurrent form. Not as strong as what you would see with the live oaks, but it can easily, you could see how people would confuse them. And then also the leaf, it's a very nondescript leafy looking oak leaf, 3 to 5 inches long. And I mean, the flower is not going to be any help either, as in a lot of these situations. If you look at the acorn, it is shaped a little bit differently. It's rounder. And if you look at the range here compared to the live oak, it pretty much covers the same area as the live oak. Doesn't go as far into Texas, but other than that, it goes almost all through Florida where we're at. And it has the lowest wind resistance. This tree is very prone to decay. Like the live oak is a generalist, and its life strategy is to live very long and produce lots of acorns over the lifetime, a long lifetime. Whereas this tree's strategy is to grow up very fast and drop a lot of acorns. but consequently, there was a trade-off there, and that like the trees put a lot more of their energy into growing fast and growing big and dropping acorns, so they don't last as long. So let's go ahead and compare them here. They are easily mistaken for one another. Like I mentioned, they're not closely related, so they don't hybridize. A lot of people think that they will, and that like when they're trying to identify them, that they'll say that it's something in between the two, but this can't be the case. These plants are very distantly related to each other as far as oaks go, and so they have different natural histories as well. The live oak, like I mentioned, is more of a generalist. You can find it upland in savannas and stuff like that. Whereas the laurel oak, you would have rarely have found that in natural areas, because the seedlings are very sensitive to fire. The live oaks can tolerate a little bit of fire, but these laurel oaks are very sensitive to it. And that's why we see them everywhere now, is that historically, most of the upland areas in Florida would have been pine dominated, but now if you look around, like these laurel oaks and some of these other things that would have been contained to wet areas are pretty prolific, and since there's no fire, nothing keeps them back from being everywhere. So, and like I mentioned, the oak tree can tolerate very adverse conditions. It deals better with drought, salt, wind, etc. Compared to the laurel oak. So just to kind of point out here some differences based on the leaves. Like I mentioned, the live oak, if you look at them here, they kind of have more of a bend to them. There's this, like I mentioned, we call the margins revolute, where they bend upward a little bit, and it looks like a boat, kind of. If you stuck that on the water, it would float, probably. Whereas on the laurel oak, they're much more flat. And so for the laurel oak and southern live oak, some of the other features on them, the acorn, you can see that there's an acorn that is very long and oblong for the live oak. And for the laurel oak, it tends to be much more orbicular, you might call that. And I don't know how well you guys can see the bark here, but the bark tends to be a lot more grooved in crevices, like within the live oak. It tends to be much more flat and smooth for the laurel oak. So I kind of think of elephant skin when I think of the live oak bark on these mature trees a lot of the time, and that you don't really see these fissures pop up the same way on the laurel oak. So just to yourself here, based on what we've seen so far, think to yourself, which one is A and which one is B in terms of species? Which one is the live oak and which one is the laurel oak? And then you can see here that the live oak are the seeds that are longer, whereas the laurel oaks are these more circular shaped, globe-shaped seeds. So here's another example based on what we've gone over. Just think to yourself which tree is which here. So the one on the left is the live oak, and the one on the right is the laurel oak, with the much smoother bark. Okay, I'll try and breeze through the last bit here on the bald cypresses. The family is Cupressaceae. This is a very ancient family. The form is called it's excurrent, as you know, that pyramidal type shape. They get to be very tall, 60 to 80 feet. The leaf is needle-like, feather-like, and the thing that's interesting is that it's a conifer, but it is deciduous. The fruit is a cone. It's a really circular cone you can sometimes see, but it's very hardy in a number of weather or climate zones, has very good wind resistance, which is something that we have to think about a lot here. And the other thing in terms of its use for horticulturally is the presence of these knees. And if you're planting it in a front yard, you can see here on the right-hand side why that might be an issue. Is that they unless you plan for those knees to be there, they can be very problematic and conflict with the rest of your yard. So, but there is a cousin to this tree, and there is kind of a debate how closely they are related to each other, and they can interbreed to a certain degree. But it's also a cypress that we call pond cypress. It doesn't grow quite as large, but if you notice here, the leaves look a lot more linear. And it's called Taxodium ascendens because a lot of times the leaves will grow upward from the branches. They will ascend. And it's still pretty similar in terms of hardiness and wind resistance, etc. And like I mentioned, they're closely related. There's a little bit of taxonomical debate, like whether they even are the same species or not. But I guess the big thing here is there is the morphology, the leaf shape, and then also this pine cypress. It is not prone to growing the roots, the cypress knees. So underutilized trees, one of the ones on my list here is also another cypress. So as long as we're on that topic, I just wanted to cover that one here. And it's the Montezuma cypress, which is from Mexico. So its characteristics are almost uniformly the same as the bald cypress, the standard bald cypress. And the only difference is that it retains its leaves through most of the winter. It might lose them a little bit throughout the year, but it is not going to lose its leaves, which is a nice feature for us around here, where it's warm enough that it'll probably keep its leaves. So as you can see here, this is the range of the standard bald cypress, Taxodium distichum. Here's the Montezuma bald cypress. And they actually use it quite a bit in nurseries in Texas, and it does really well there. And it's one of these trees I think that we could promote more here as well, because of the fact that it still has this really nice form. It deals with hurricanes really well. And it doesn't produce a bunch of cypress knees in your yard, which is a very good thing for most homeowners. So it's also the whitest tree in the world is one of these. They don't know how they got this tree to do this. This is in Oaxaca, Mexico. But it's one of they thought originally maybe that these were multiple stems that they fused together via cutting and grafting, but they've done genetic analysis on it, and it's actually one very large tree. So it's kind of a mystery as to how they're pretty sure that it was a ceremonial tree and they were able to get it to grow this way through human intervention. But as to how they did it, we don't really know. But it is the whitest tree in the world. So another cool side note on that one. So with that, I just had some other trees that I wanted to go over, but I'm going to save them for another time because we don't have a lot of time right now. And I just wanted to conclude there. And I guess if we've got any questions or anything like that, like we can talk about it and then go into the all members meeting here. Let me go back to our normal view. All right, I'm out of the sharing here. So yeah, if you've got anything, okay, I can see that your guys' chats now. I was blocked out of that earlier. But is there equivalent of plant hardiness zone from Southeast Asia? I'm sure that there's something out there that people have looked at, but nothing that's widely dispersed or anything like that. I mean, the hardiness zones are a product of the USDA Department of Agriculture. And so, I mean, it's kind of up to a country to come up with that. Usually they're not doing that on their own, you know, like together for all of that region. So, does the crepe myrtle support a wide variety of wildlife? Not particularly. It's not something that's from around here. And I mean, it's still a lot better than nothing. But in terms of things that you think bring in wildlife are usually your fruiting trees and trees that like have lots of cavities and things like that, lots of areas that can be exploited for cover. So it's not really a big one for wildlife. It will bring in some pollinators though. So Janice, I have a sample here in my office, the floss. Oh yeah, the floss from the sea. Yeah, from the silk floss tree. Can the silk floss trees grow in a wet landscape? I think that they tend to prefer drier. Drier is better for them, but I mean, they're definitely not one that you want to put into an area that's inundated all the time or saturated. Okay, anything, let's see. What is it that the winged elm puts after its flowers? Oh, they're called samaras. So if you ever see maples as well, they're considered to be samaras as well. Anything that is wind dispersed. If I have a red crepe myrtle, that means it's a Muskogee? But I think it was not the Muskogee that was red. I think the red one was the Tuscarora. There's a lot. I mean, there's a lot of varieties out there. Most of them are named after Native Americans, and I think they were developed through the National Arboretum up in Virginia. But I'd have to look into that more, like in terms of their names and that type of thing. But red, there are many types of red and different colored crepe myrtles. What are the water requirements for cypress? They can tolerate very dry conditions to wet, to the most wet conditions. They're very hardy. So that's kind of the cool thing about them, is that they can survive upland, and people think that because they're next to water bodies all the time where they see them, that's what they need, but that's not necessarily true. And they are actually a very fast growing tree upland if you plant them there. Is silk floss a Hercules club? Mine got struck by lightning. No, a Hercules club is actually, it's a native member of the citrus family that we have here. And that's maybe one that I'll try and cover at some point if I do like a native tree presentation. So Muskogee, yeah, someone say here, Muskogee is a lavender color. So all right, anything else? I mean, yeah, if you guys want to mute yourselves, etc., I think we can go straight into the meeting here. And I guess I'll kick it off here. The Facebook group is currently set up. So I want you guys to, I will send you an email letting you know that, like, or giving you a link to it. Amber Boas set that up for us. So I will give you guys a link to the closed group where you guys can communicate with each other. Because I was hearing from some of you that you wanted to be able to have a forum where you could communicate with each other through all of this. So that's now operational. So yeah, thank you, Amber, for doing that. The other thing, I guess, that I wanted to bring up is the remote plant clinic. It's still operational, and we're kind of closing out the experiment here into it just being fully functional. Some of you have responded to what I said last week about, if you're interested, please let me know. And that still stands. If you guys are interested, just go ahead and email me, and then we'll have a separate Zoom meeting at some point. So anything else? Any comments? Anything good? Anything anybody wants to share? Well, I guess it seems kind of quiet. Is there questions on here?
Yes.
John? Dina? Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, good. I just want to remind everyone to go out in their yards and take pictures of something that is just looking wonderful, and to show what a great gardener you are and all the training we've had as a master gardener. I'll send out an email, but we're still sharing our garden via the PH News. And this is really a good time to share what's growing, because this is a tough time to be growing anything. So if you are growing something great, please share it. And I'll send out. That's it. Thanks.
How do you do that?
How do you do what, Penny?
Share the pictures.
You will send me some pictures.
Oh, just send it to you?
Uh-huh. And then
And then where do you post them?
it'll end up in PH News.
Oh, I see. Not online.
No, PH News.
Okay, okay.
Okay. But I'll send out a reminder with all the criteria that I need. So, okay. Yeah.
Yeah,
then,
I can include that in the email, Dina, if you'd like.
Yeah.
I got lots of stuff.
And if you haven't checked out the PH News for July, do. It's really great. At least the sharing the garden part is really, really, really great. So, check it
Oh,
out.
we got lots of pictures.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, cool. Well, I guess thank you guys for being here. If you want, oh wait, so I guess there's still a few little comments here on the side. Let me check that out. How's the traffic been in the clinic? Very variable. Some days it's completely slammed and some days it's been very quiet. So I don't know what are the driving factors for all that, but that's just what we're rolling with right now. And I'm very thankful for the people that can make it in and for like having these afternoon folks going with the remote plant clinic, because it can be very hectic sometimes. So get a half of continuing education credit for reading the PH News. Yeah, you get it. Yep. So, okay, well, oh, what was on the bed sheet? You don't want to know. Somebody brought in bed sheets yesterday with like, I don't know. There was something there. I couldn't tell. It looked like something that like an animal would have left, like dandruff or something like that. And this lady said it wasn't her dog. It wasn't, she was very, very set that it was not the dog. It was not nothing had gone in there, but like she wanted to clear out insects, and that's why we looked at it. And I looked in under the microscope. There was nothing that indicated it was insects. So anyway, I don't know what was going on there. And, I told her to like, let us know if she figures it out. And actually what Ed suggested was setting up a camera trap, what you would use for hunting, basically, if she wanted to, because she said it happened during the day while she wasn't in bed. She went to bed that night and there was like a bunch of dandruff in her bed. So I don't know. So some things about the plant clinic haven't changed since you guys left.
Termites in the ceiling.
I tried to say that, maybe it was air stuff from the ventilation. Was it something coming from the ceiling? She was adamant that it was none of that. And I said, well, I don't know what else it could have been besides an animal at that point. So anyway, I guess if you guys want to do breakout rooms again, if there's nothing else here, you can go ahead. We can do that if you would like.
Don, I have a question. I'm a wannabe master gardener. What is the pH newsletter?
So pH Newsletter is a monthly newsletter that goes out to be shared among the folks that are in the program. And it kind of, the big thing is that like it covers a variety of topics that are relevant to what's going on that month. And then it also kind of covers some of the stuff that's going on at the Extension Center. So it kind of gives you a pulse of what we're doing here at Extension and things that you should be thinking about in your garden as well.
Okay, thanks.
Oh, geez. I'll have to ask Ed more about these bed bugs, et cetera.
Yeah.
So, but yeah.
The lady who almost took her shirt off.
Oh, geez. Yeah, I've seen some pretty silly stuff so far. Like,
Penny by her voice.
And freak out.
I'll bring it up. But I'll try to get, maybe I'll bring Ed on here at some point and give a best of the plant clinic, you know,
Yes,
that type of
yes.
thing. So, all right. Well, with that, let's see. I guess we'll just stick to the normal here. It's 1:04, but let's just keep it 15 minutes for volunteer service and 45 minutes for continuing education.
How do you do
because
50?
Dr. Cam kind of balances out with his intro in the beginning. And then I guess go ahead. I'll leave it for anybody that wants to like hang out here and talk on the breakout sessions.
How do
It's up here.
How do you show 50 minutes?
What's that?
How do you show 50 minutes?
Said 15.
Oh, 15.
15?
Oh, 15.
Yeah, 15.
Never mind. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
0.25.
Okay. Okay.
All right. Well, I'm going to go ahead and create 6 rooms here, and everybody take care, stay safe, and I'll see you next week,
Bye.
if not sooner.
Bye.
All right, bye.
Bye.
Bye.